Hello there, Lunar Squadron, and welcome back to the channel. Ever since we got the official PlayStation Store listing for Marvel Spider-Man 2 a few months ago, and we got this paragraph that stated that we would be seeing more villains from the Marvel's Rogues Gallery alongside Venom, Lizard, and Kraven, we've all been wondering who those possible new additions to the roster in Marvel Spider-Man 2 could be. Well, this weekend, we got the official story trailer for Marvel Spider-Man 2 at San Diego Comic-Con, and in this trailer, we got a surprise reveal for one of the new villains in Marvel Spider-Man 2, and it is none other than the return of Martin Lee, Mr. Negative himself, returning to the Insomniac Spider-Verse. And in this video, we're going to be breaking it down why he could potentially be returning to Marvel Spider-Man 2 and how he could be potentially returning to the game. But before we do that, if you're new to the channel, we would love to have you as always, and the way to do that is just go down below this video, hit that little subscribe button, the bell notification right on next to it. It'll notify you every single time Andreas and I upload. Now with that out of the way, Andreas, let's talk about one of our familiar friends, Mr. Negative.
Let's do it, guys. Nick, you said it in the intro. I think the first step of this really interesting conversation is, why do we think that they are bringing back Mr. Negative for this story? Because I think the why is just such an interesting conversation. And really, for me, I think the first step of that conversation requires us to go back to where we left off with Mr. Negative in the first game. And I think the first game did a really excellent job of setting up this very interesting villain in Mr. Negative, where he's literally a perfect yin-yang of a character, where on the one hand, he has founded Feast, the organization that is philanthropic at nature. It's designed to feed and help people that do not have resources to help themselves. And then on the other hand, he's leading the Inner Demons, an underground organization that's causing all of this trouble. And I think this character is such a fascinating one, but the ending of Spider-Man 1 almost does this character a bit of a injustice. It does it a bit of a disservice, because if you guys will remember back to Spider-Man PS4, he has this interaction with Norman Osborn where he's trying to kill Norman. Spider-Man comes in, saves Norman, and then Otto Octavius comes in after Spider-Man faces off against Mr. Negative. And Otto calls Mr. Negative useless and literally throws him to the side. And that is the end of Mr. Negative in the Insomniac Spider-Verse. While he's mentioned off-screen a few times throughout Miles Morales, that he's in the raft, that the Inner Demons disbanded after they faced off against the Underground, his character is literally thrown to the side. And so I almost think that Insomniac might have felt an obligation to revisit this very interesting character, flesh him out a bit more, and show where he is today. How is he reflecting on his experience where he gave in to vengeance to take down Norman, where he joined the Sinister Six to take down Norman, and it backfired on him? I think he really is a character that has some goodness to his heart, that, you know, he really does have good intentions, that he had this origin story of wanting to make his parents proud, and it backfired on him when he accidentally killed his parents after he received the Mr. Negative powers. But I think Insomniac almost has a duty to revisit this very interesting character after his end. And Nick, there's another really good reason to bring back this character, right?
Yeah, there sure is, and I think you bring up a great point that from a pure practicality standpoint for Insomniac, this character still has a lot of his story left to tell, so for those reasons alone, it would make sense to bring back Mr. Negative into the story. But knowing what we know about what Insomniac is trying to accomplish with the story of Marvel Spider-Man 2, I think he makes a lot of sense to return for those reasons. And that is, we know now that Marvel Spider-Man 2 is all about dealing with darkness, dealing with the darkness inside of you, the internal struggles and the external struggles, just that battle that our characters will have with darkness and how they're able to handle it, how it will impact their relationships and the people they love, and how it will impact New York City. And this is a great struggle for Miles to face in this game. We know now the direction that we are headed in for Peter and what he's going to struggle with, the symbiote suit and dealing with Venom and what it does to him and his personality and his relationships. But what we haven't seen up to this point is what is the struggle that Miles is going to have to deal with in this game? What is the darkness that he is going to fight? And, I think a lot of us up to this point were speculating that what he was going to have to struggle with was dealing with Peter and how he's changing and the consequences of what Peter does and Miles having to clean up for him. But now we know with Mr. Negative returning that there's a completely different level of darkness that he's going to deal with, and that is, what is he going to do with the man who killed his father?
That is a great way to look at it, Nick, especially when we know that Miles is going to be having this internal dialogue throughout this story. We know that he is struggling and procrastinating to write his college entry essay. And what is one of the things that you do when you're thinking of how to write your college entry essay is you're thinking introspectively. You're thinking about what's important to you. Who are you? What is your identity? And I think his father is so integral to his identity as a hero, as someone who persists to want to be a bigger and better Spider-Man. I think that comes from his father, the hero mentality. And he's going to be grappling with the loss of his father throughout this game. I really do expect that to weigh heavy on Miles, and to know that he's going to be toe-to-toe with the person responsible for his father's death is going to weigh very heavily on this story. And one fascinating thing about this interaction, Nick, is the sheer irony of the 2 points of view of these two characters. If you really think about it, the key motive for Mr. Negative in the first game was vengeance. He wanted to avenge his parents, who he killed, but he blames the death of his parents on Norman Osborn. And so he knows firsthand what it is to want to avenge your parents and for that vengeance to backfire. And in the scene that we get in the story trailer, he's toe-to-toe with Miles, who Miles tells Mr. Negative, you have no idea what you've done to me, how you've hurt me. And to some degree, I think Mr. Negative actually does have some idea, because he has had someone cause the death of his parents, and he is now looking at Miles, who has a choice. He has a choice to give in to that vengeance, give in to the revenge, or he can maybe appreciate that vengeance causes more vengeance in some ways. Miles's vengeance is caused by Mr. Negative's vengeance, because Mr. Negative, of course, only killed Miles's dad because it was in his broader plan to take down Norman and to stick it to Norman for killing his own parents. And so this is almost a chain that we're seeing, and I'm wondering if Mr. Negative is going to almost talk him down in this situation, because Nick, from the looks of it, it doesn't look like Mr. Negative is here as an antagonistic villain. It looks like he's almost incident to a broader story. If you just look at his facial expressions here, it looks like he's almost been broken out of prison against his will. And this almost feeds into our second question and the second most important part of this discussion, and that is, how do we think he's going to factor into this story, Nick? Just based on what we have, the shots from the story trailer, how are you expecting Mr. Negative to play into the fold here?
Yeah, it's a great question and a natural follow-up question to why is Mr. Negative being involved in this story. And I completely agree with what you're saying. I don't know if we're reading too far into this story trailer and too far into the body language, but I agree. He looks completely non-confrontational. He looks incredibly shocked to be in the position he's in. He's incredibly shocked to see both Spider-Man, and when Miles tells him, Lee, you have no idea what you've taken from me, he's almost like, he looks like he's taken aback, like, who are you? What are you talking about? Like, what did I do to you? Kind of. That's how I see his body language. So I just wonder how he ends up in this situation. It does feel like he is a byproduct of something bigger and a consequence of something bigger. However, Andreas, given what we know about Mr. Negative, we know we're dealing with the Venom symbiote. there is some lore here from the Spider-Man universe that could, I don't know, possibly explain why Mr. Negative is showing up here.
That is absolutely correct, and this is a theory that I've seen bouncing around, and one that I thought of right off the bat when I saw Mr. Negative in the fold in the story trailer is, we know Venom's in this story, we know now that Mr. Negative is in this story, and so that does trigger the possibility of an anti-Venom situation. And for those of you who are not familiar with the storyline of Anti-Venom, the way that it goes in the comics is the Venom symbiote leaves Eddie Brock with cancer because he has remnants of the Venom symbiote, and then he ends up going to work for Feast, which is owned by Mr. Negative, and while he's working for Feast, Mr. Negative attempts to heal Eddie Brock from the cancer that he is suffering from, and in the process of attempting to heal Eddie Brock with his negative powers, we'll call them, he imbues Eddie Brock with a certain thing in his bloodstream, which later on in the comic line crosses over with the Venom symbiote when the Venom symbiote tries to reinfect Eddie Brock, and it causes Anti-Venom, which is a version of the Venom symbiote which appears kind of like Mr. Negative insofar as the black and white is switched and it's like a white Venom, but also it has healing properties to it. And Nick, with the whole heal the world storyline here and Harry's mentality, isn't there a way that we can maybe fold this into the general narrative of Spider-Man 2?
Yeah, so off the bat, I just want to say, we know Eddie Brock is not going to be Venom in this game. So if an anti-Venom situation shows up, it won't be for the whole Eddie Brock storyline. It will be completely different. And B, I think, Andreas, both you and I agree that presenting anti-Venom to this game would probably make it a little too convoluted and not something we see happening, but we're just having a conversation about it because now we know that Venom and Mr. Negative will be in the same game as each other, and it is a possibility, so I think it's worth talking about why and why it makes sense. And you're absolutely correct. One thing that Anti-Venom gains from the traditional Venom symbiote is the ability to heal and heal diseases. And we know, obviously, that Harry himself is dealing with a very deadly disease. So it's not hard to see a logical process here where perhaps, let's say, the whole lizard situation, Dr. Connors, it's been stated that he's the only one that can help Harry. Maybe he becomes incapacitated. Maybe Peter does something to him, Spider-Man does something to him, but he's no longer able to help Harry anymore, or what he's able to do just doesn't work. What is another avenue Norman could pursue to help his son? Because we've seen some people speculate, we've seen some theories out there that perhaps the traditional Venom symbiote is not accepting Harry as a host. A lot of people say that it's rejecting him, that it doesn't want to bond with him completely. And let's just say, for pure speculation, that is something that actually does play out. The Venom does not see Harry as a reasonable or realistic host, and they just don't work well together normally. Then perhaps Norman, who said he will do whatever it takes to save his son, maybe he reaches out to Mr. Negative or attempts to break him out because he knows what Mr. Negative is capable of doing. He knows what was injected in him, what the intent behind that was. So it's just easy to see where that storyline would develop. But to me, Andreas, it's probably a little too convoluted to happen in Marvel Spider-Man 2 because we're already dealing with Kraven, who's going to be the catalyst behind all this. We're dealing with Lizard. We're dealing with Venom. Whatever's going on with Harry and Norman and Peter with the symbiote. It's just a lot to handle, but it's something that you could see happening. I still think, though, at the end of the day, the reason that Mr. Negative, that Martin Lee is here, is to present that darkness, that internal battle that Miles is going to have to deal with, and seeing some resolution for hopefully both of their characters in this game going into Marvel Spider-Man 3.
You know what, Nick? I kind of do share in your hesitation for Anti-Venom being involved in this story. I agree. I think it might be a little bit too much, but also I think there's even a practical consideration for bringing Anti-Venom into the fold, and that is when we're looking at Mr. Negative being in this story, the whole Anti-Venom plot line, the way that arises is you have Norman who's trying to heal his son, and then people are saying that Norman breaks Mr. Negative out of prison to then create Anti-Venom to save Harry. And the reason why I think that might fall short is, if you recall back to Spider-Man PS4, Norman is perfectly aware that Mr. Negative is trying to kill him, and it almost seems a bit hard to believe that he would then want to break the man who's trying to kill him out of prison. I think there's some security for Norman in knowing that Mr. Negative is in prison, and beyond that, I think the whole healing effects of the Anti-Venom symbiote is almost a byproduct of Mr. Negative and Venom, and so Norman wouldn't be perfectly aware of that byproduct at this particular stage in the story. And so I'm just not sure. It is a bit convoluted, a bit complicated, and I think I agree with you, Nick. It's going to maybe thicken the plotline a bit too much, especially when we were already thinking that this story was going to be a bit too convoluted with all the villains running around already. Now you've added back into the fold Mr. Negative, and then to think that there's going to be Anti-Venom as well. I mean, I'd love to see it, but what do you guys think? Let us know in the comments down below. Is it going to be too complicated? Is it going to make sense? And do you think it's going to happen? If you had to put your money on it, is Anti-Venom going to be in this game or not? Also, would love to hear all of you guys chime into our broader discussion here about why do you think Mr. Negative is involved in this game? Do you think it's merely to add depth to his character after he was thrown aside in the first game? Is it to add depth to Miles, or for some other reason? Why do we think he's breaking out of prison? Is someone breaking him out of prison? There's so many questions circulating around this character that it makes for such an interesting discussion in the comments down below that I'd love to read through later on. However, as for this discussion, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, we will see you all next time.